Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Today is a webinar for standard drafters, and we'll talk about the simple template, giving you a quick start guide and drafting guidance through the simple template. So as usual, you will all be muted during the presentations. We like to let you know that you can use the Q&A for entering your questions. By the way, my name is Els, and I will be the moderator in the background of the webinar, looking at all your questions together with some other colleagues. So please use the Q&A panel for that. The chat is disabled for all the attendees, but you have the Q&A panel that looks like this to enter your questions. We will reply as many questions as possible during this session. Should your question be unreplied afterwards, please don't worry, because we intend to create a Q&A report that we, as usual, make available via the website. The webinar is also recorded, so you will receive an email afterwards with the presentation and the full recording that you can share with colleagues if you would like to. We're also on Twitter, so feel free to tweet about this webinar and the topic. Of course, we are at Standards for EU, and there is a dedicated hashtag training for standards. So let's immediately dive into the subject of today together with our speaker, Amy. Amy is my colleague working in the editing and production team at the Standardization and Digital Solutions of SEN and Senelec. So Amy, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Els. Good morning, everybody. So as Els has already said, today we will be talking about the simple template, and we'll do something a little bit differently today. So instead of just giving you a flat presentation, I'm going to take you through the template. So we'll talk about what it is, firstly, and how you can get started with using it. We'll use it live. I'll show you some tips and tricks for efficient drafting and how to style everything beautifully, so that the editors can focus then on just the content of your standard when we finally get it, so that when you have your final publication, we have a very high quality standard. And then to finish, as always, we'll go through the internal regulations part 3, just a recap of those key points. So let's first look at the simple templates. So what are they? So the simple template is a flat document. It contains all the applicable styles that we need to create an XML version of the text. So it is not a Word template in the sense of an add-in or anything that you can sort of save into Word. It is just a regular document. So you can create copies of it. You can save it on your desktop, in your documents. It's very, very easy to use. You type straight into it, or you can copy and paste straight into it. It contains all the obligatory and optional elements as defined by the Internal Regulations Part 3 for an easy and efficient drafting. And it's created by your editors, so it's guaranteed to be up to date with all of the latest rules, the requirements and styles, and we're constantly updating this. And in fact, actually, after this webinar has happened, once we have some of your feedback and your questions, we'll be supplying you with an updated template as well. So you really will, come the new year, have a very, very up-to-date template. And then finally, it makes XML conversion easier. So just so that you remember, CCMC has the requirement to provide XML for 100% of all applicable deliverables. There are some exceptions, but generally speaking, we are obliged to provide XML. So using the template just helps us to do that a little bit. So now we're going to look at getting started. So I'm going to show you where it is. And then once we've downloaded it, I'm going to show you how to use it. So the styling, how to copy and paste and type into it. Some of the required elements we'll go through page by page. And just to note that the template is the same for SEN and Senelec. The only differences between them are the font, the European forward template, and in Senelec you have the option to add line numbering as well. So let's go ahead and download them. So these are clickable links, which you'll have access to. So let's go first of all to the Senelec BOSS site. So to get here, you'll access the Senelec BOSS at .senelec.eu. You'll go to reference material and then forms and templates, and you have 4 tabs. If you click on technical work, all the way down, you have the standard template. And if I click this, as you can see, we have a download here. And then if we go back to our presentation, it is the same thing for the SEN BOSS as well. So you go to boss.sen.eu, reference material, forms and templates. The file path is exactly the same under technical work again. And scroll down, we have the SEN simple template for drafting standards. And if I click, you see it's another download. I just want to show you these I've already pre-downloaded for speed. So these are basically the exact same document. I just want to show you really quickly. So if I scroll on the SEN template and the Senelec template, we see the only difference there is the font. So for SEN, it is Cambria size 11. And for Senelec, it is Arial size 10. And then the only difference is we have the European forward, but these are exactly the same documents. So if you do have trouble on either side, you can always hop over to the other website and download the other template and see if that works for you. For the purposes of today's webinar, however, I have modified the template ever so slightly just to incorporate those differences in. And this is what we're going to go through today. So before you get started with actually drafting your standard, there are 3 things that you need to do. So the first thing that I would recommend is to apply these paragraph markers. So as you can see, without them, it looks very nice and clean. But if you add them, it shows you every single space, every hard return, soft return, tabs, that kind of thing. This is really useful because it shows you sort of where spacing is reliant on the styles and where spacing is actually a hard return. So pop those on, it'll make your life easier. The second thing to do is to find the style template, the style palette, sorry. So for this one, you're going to stay in the Home tab right here. And then under the styles section, you have a tiny little arrow. And if you click this, a little box appears. Now this is your style palette. It's fully customizable, so you can move it around as you like. You can make it bigger, smaller, wider, thinner, that kind of thing. And it contains all of the styles within the document. So you see, you just scroll through, find the styles that you need. So this we're going to keep open. And then the next thing is the view. Oh, I don't see it. So the view that we have, I'm going to use my keyboard shortcuts. We go to Control, Alt, and N, and we have the draft view. Now, normally on the left-hand side, we should have a little style pane, basically, but we can't see it. So how do you get that? You go to File, you go into your options, and we go into Advanced, and then we need to scroll down to the display options. And you see here we have style area pane width in draft and outline views, and this normally is set to 0. You just want to add maybe an inch in there, or if you're working in centimeters, you can add a centimeter, just something in there. And then if we click OK, and we go back to our draft view, this panel appears, and this panel is obligatory to have if you want to see the styles simply. All right, so once you have those things set up, we can go ahead and look at the template itself. So, as I've said, I've modified one of the templates just to incorporate those changes, but for both templates, the principle is exactly the same. We can just go ahead and type in the CENTC. If you're starting new work, you might not have your document reference yet, and that is completely fine. Just leave these blank if you don't have a reference. If you're revising an existing standard, pop your reference in there, and it will always be PREN for inquiry or FPR, CEN, TS, or TR for a technical report. So just be aware of that. You then have your titles. So if you have just the one title, that's completely fine. You just paste that in there. If you have access to the German and French titles, you can pop those in there as well. Same thing with the ICS classification number. And then if we scroll down, we see we have our first header. So again, if you have the reference, you can pop that in there. If you don't, it's not a problem. One of the questions we often get with the template is about the table of contents. So sometimes once you've started your drafting, actually the table of contents doesn't reflect what's in the text. So what I would recommend that you do for this is, first of all, open up your navigation. So you can hit Control and F to open this, and just pop your headings on. So this gives you a comprehensive overview of all of the headings that are found in there. So you don't need to keep referring to your table of contents. But on the off chance that you do want to see this, you want to see where you're up to. If this isn't updating as it should, you can go here, you can go to Review, the View References tab, sorry. You go to Table of Contents, and then Custom Table of Contents. And then you're going to hit Options and Reset. So this will basically remove all of the styles that show in the table of contents. And then you go through and you just need to add a little 1 next to all of the titles that you want to show. So we've got an Annex. You've also got Annex Z there as well if it's a harmonized standard. Oops. Oh, no. There we go, just 1. Your bibliography title. So this is in alphabetical order as well. Scroll through, we have our forward title. And then headings 1, 2, and 3 are automatically with 1, 2, and 3. If you have a lot of heading 3, I recommend removing that just to keep your table of contents nice and small. For the purposes of this document, we'll just have heading 1 showing. and then you need the intro title. And I think that is everything. Yeah. So then you hit OK and OK again, and it will ask you if you want to replace it. And you click yes, and it will replace it. It looks a little bit messy because I've added some Senelec elements in there too, and it's contrasting with the Sen ones, but that should need to know for you. And it's worth doing that at the very end once you've finished your drafting as well. So then we have the European forwards. So I do have for Sen and Senelec in this document. So we'll go through the Sen one first. So all of the red text in the simple template is editable for you. So you can take a read through. You can decide what is applicable for you and what is not applicable, and anything that's not applicable, you can go ahead and delete. So the simple template will look a little different to this because we are in the process of updating it with our forward templates. But for the reference, if you have the reference, it's simply a case of just typing it in. For Sen, we ask that you add the Sen TC and the title of the TC as well, and the secretariat as well. That is obligatory information. You then choose if it is a Sen inquiry, or if you have the TS or TR, technical specification or technical report, you add the required wording there. If it's a revision of a standard, you need to put the superseding information in, and at inquiry stage, it is always will supersede. But for publication stage, if you're revising it, it will say supersedes. So just make sure that changes. And then if you are revising the standard, you do need to provide us with the list of technical modifications that have been made, and it should be laid out in a list, just like this. So you can just be very short and concise, a very brief overview of the changes that you've made, that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be too long. For harmonized standards, you've got this wording as well. So you can add this if you need to. Feel free to modify this as suits your needs. And then throughout, you'll see these note to drafters as well. So these need to be deleted before you submit the text to us. These just give you some information and guidance on how to use the template for some specific parts where it might not be so clear. So the Sen forward should be quite simple. And then the Senelec forward is slightly different. So you need to provide us with the reference if you have it. If you don't, that's not a problem. You need to see if you are TC, SR, SC, and the number, and then the title of your TC, SR, or SC. You'll choose, much like the Sen simple, the Sen forward, the inquiry or the vote on TS or vote on TR. You have your implementation dates in this table. And then the same information again. So if you are revising an existing standard, the superseding information, a list of the technical changes, and the harmonization information as well. Now the forward has some special styling behind it. So if we head over to our draft view, we can see that there's forward title for the title, and it's the same thing for the Sen forward as well. So you see forward title. For each of the text elements, it's forward text. And then for the tables, it's a little bit difficult to see the tables. Unfortunately, it doesn't show up in the draft view, but you can see what it's styled as. It should show up on the style palette here. It should jump to the style that it's at. So we can see it is table body, which is what it should be. You'll notice that these are dotted lines as well around the table. So these are what we call ghost lines or grid lines. And this is actually quite a useful tool to have. If you highlight your table, and in your home tab or your table design tab, you have this little box. Maybe we go to the table design. So under borders, it's a good idea to have this view grid lines, because then when you hide the table borders using the no border, you can still see where tabular content is. So it's worth doing that. It's a little tip. Tables like this need to be styled as table body. We'll talk about that shortly. Now, one of the problems here is we have a list, we have some list content. The list content can't be styled as forward text. So how do we change this? I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to go to my style palette, and I'm going to go down to where the lists are. So we can see we've got a few elements. We've got list bullet, we've got list continue, and list number. So for these lists, because I have the M dash, which I'm sure some of you will have heard us talk about, I'm going to style this as list continue. So I'm going to highlight it and list continue. And you see what happens there is it pushes the text in a little bit and reduces the amount of space with the tab. So I talked about having these paragraph markers on it so that we can see elements like this. We can see that it's not using the rulers to align them, but rather it's using a tab. So when you style your lists, this is how it should be. It's very simple, a case of point, scroll, and style. Very simple. So then we can move on to the introduction. So the introduction is an optional element unless you have any patent rights. So if you have any patent rights, you need to pop those in the introduction. Other than that, it is optional. So let's first of all look at the styling behind this. So we have intro title for the title, as we can see in our palette. And then everything else contained therein is body text. Very simple. But if you don't want to have your introduction, if you don't want to put it in and you don't need it, you can simply delete it, and then the scope will pop up. So that should be all fairly straightforward. Now from here, the styling gets a little bit more simple. So for the scope, if we hop back into our draft view, we have simply heading 1. Now for every single heading in the text where it's just one number, you'll use heading 1. So this should be fairly straightforward. In the scope alone, everything contained therein is body text. It's again very simple. And just a note about the scope, it's statement of facts only, no requirements, recommendations, or permissions. Please make sure it's very simple. We then have the normative references. Again, you'll style this as heading 1. And the simple template contains the introductory text for this. So this is something that we keep up to date. So please don't try and add something new. Don't redraft this. This is the official boilerplate text that's taken from the internal regulations part 3. Clause 2 is obligatory, even if it is empty, and we have introductory wording for that too. So there are no normative references in this document. After the introductory wording, you'll then add each one of your references on a separate line using a hard return, as you can see with this little mark right here. I won't talk about the rules of normative references just yet, because there is some slides about that later on. But you also have a note to the drafter right here that just reminds you it is a compulsory clause, and if you don't have any normative references, there's your wording. So the styling for the normative references clause, again, very simple. You have the heading 1 for the clause title, body text for your introductory wording, and then each one of your references that come afterwards needs to be ref norm. So you can see the styling is fairly self-explanatory in terms of the title. And then we can go ahead and delete those notes to drafters. So next we have the terms and definitions clause. So again, we have the introductory wording, and because you have a few different options within the terms and definitions, or you can refer to terms and definitions from a different document and the following as well, or maybe you don't have any at all. We've put the text that you need to edit in red, so it's enough just to choose which one you want. It's worth noting as well, if you do have terms and definitions that come from a different document, make sure that document goes into the clause too, because it is therefore normative if it's referred to in here. These databases are optional, you don't need to have them in there, but we've put them in there just in case you do want to have them. And then one of the things that we ask when you draft up your terms and definitions themselves is that you separate each one with a hard return. So please don't pop a soft return in there. And the reason for this is when you come to style it, if there is a soft return, like so, if I try to style this, so let's style the term number, which is term num. If I hop into my draft view, it's treated this entire term and the term number as one thing, whereas if I split the two with a hard return, I can style that as term number, I can style that as term, and I can style this as definition. So that's something to be aware of as you go through and you are drafting, that soft returns, it makes anything that's put together with a soft return, it treats it as one chunk of text. So do try and use, or please do use hard returns where possible. The styling for the terms and definitions clause is very simple. So body text for the introductory wording as always. If you do have these two lists, make sure they're styled as list bullet, but this is already done for you, so you shouldn't have any issues with that. You'll delete the note to drafter. And then for the terms and definitions themselves, you'll style the term number as term num, the term as term, and the definition as definition. But perhaps maybe you have a note to entry, or you want to provide a source to the definition. So in that case, the note to entry will be styled as note, and the source will be styled as definition. Please lay everything out as you see it in the template. So where you have a note to entry, even if there's just one, it does need to be numbered. Don't lay anything out in a table. Please don't try and reinvent what we've done. If you keep it as it is, we won't have any trouble with the XML file at the end. So that should be fairly simple and straightforward. So for the rest of the document, we have clause 4 onward. The styling in the rest of the document is very, very simple. It's very straightforward, very easy to use. Each of the styles are fairly self-explanatory. So we do have, from headings 1 to heading 9, you'll see in the style palette. We recommend that you don't go as far as heading 9, just from the point of view of in-text citations. It can get very, very messy, especially if you have those in-text citations up to heading 9. Additionally, if we have to remove any hanging paragraphs or anything like that, if we have heading 9, it's a bit more complex to try and renumber everything. So we've given you an example in the template of up to heading 6. But if you do want to apply the style to a heading, say you want to remove a hanging paragraph, all you need to do is just type your text in. Let's head over to our draft view so you can see the style. We can see it's body text, so we'll highlight, and I want to change this to heading 7. So I've got it highlighted, heading 7, and there we go. So it'll style it for you. You don't need to do anything special. This is also automatic numbering. So let's say I need to add something just before it to remove a hanging paragraph, maybe. If I go ahead and click heading 7 again, it will automatically renumber it. So that's fairly straightforward. Any kind of text like this should be styled as body text. So there's nothing special that you need to do to it. It's not a list or a note or anything. It's just plain body text. And this is used throughout the document as well. You might sometimes want to refer to a specific paragraph, for example, more specifically in test methods clauses and reagents clauses or apparatus clauses. So you've got this option to have a numbered paragraph, which falls under the style of P2. Or if you want to go a little further, P3, P4, P5, P6. This numbering is not automatic, unfortunately, so it's worth trying to assess which ones you want to number beforehand, and then putting these numbers in at the end. You can copy paste, that kind of thing. So it's fairly straightforward. We then have the example style and the note style. With these two, simply just makes it one font size smaller. So again, it's just a case of highlighting your text, clicking your style, and you're good to go. When you are drafting notes, make sure that you put a tab afterwards and then type in your note content, like so. Sometimes we see that note is a small word with a colon. Please don't do this. This is because some of the macros that we have when we edit, they highlight certain words in notes. And if this isn't written all in capitals, those macros tend not to work. So just help us out a little bit. And if you need to number your notes, simply a space and then your number. When you are using lists as well, we often refer to this M dash. The M dash is used not just in lists, but also in table titles and figure titles as well. So it's worth noting that. Style them list bullet or list continue. So how do you find this M dash? Because we talk about it quite a lot. So you'll go to the Insert tab, and right over here you have symbols. So we click this and we click More Symbols. There we go. We have this Special Characters tab. So right here you have the very first one, M dash. All you need to do is double click and it will insert it for you. So that in the background. Or you can click Insert as well. And hopefully, if you've inserted it correctly, when you go to your symbol, it should be right here. It will be symbol 190, I believe. So make sure that you know where that is, because you'll need to use that for, as I said, your figure titles, table titles, and any lists that use this dash. Sometimes you might like to use a numbered list. So it's enough to put a bracket, 1 bracket, I, something like that. For those, you'll use list number, and each indent will be list number 2, list number 3, all the way up to list number 5. So that is, again, fairly straightforward. We then move on to our annexes. Now, annexes have a special style. You'll see we've used some soft returns here, and that's because we need to keep the title as one big chunk of text, basically, because this all needs to be the same style. So for this, you'll use annex. We'll talk about the Annex Z styling shortly. And then each clause title within the annex needs to be the A styling. So the A2, A3, A4, A5. And that is because A2, because there's an A there and then it's point something. So there's 2 numbers right here, if you think of it that way. The same thing for the content. You've got body text for all of the text, the paragraphs elements. But then we have an example of a table in the annexes. So the table styling is again, fairly straightforward. There's that M dash. So this is what we ask you to lay it out as. Table title, fairly straightforward, styled as table title. Your table header needs to be clearly defined and concise. So we recommend that you make it bold just to make it easier to see. And you can see we'll style that as table header. So for us in this example, it's just one simple row. All of the content that's in the table, so all of these cells here, will be styled as table body. If you want to make either of these two a little bit smaller, so your table header or your table body a little smaller, we have these options. We have table body minus or minus minus. And as you can see, table body minus or table header minus just takes it down one font point. So it will take it down to font 10. Minus minus takes it down to font 9. So if you've got a lot of information in there and it looks a bit better smaller, those options are available to you. We then have table notes to the table. And this is where the styling can get a little bit confusing. So a table note written like this is styled as table footer note, but a table footnote written like this is styled as table footer because it's the very end of the table. Another thing to note about the table footnotes especially is where you have this call out right here. I've just removed the styling behind it. You need to make sure that it's either superscript or raised, not both. And the styling that you do over here needs to match the styling that's in the end of the table itself. So what do I mean by that? Well, I've got this A highlighted because this is my footnote callout. And if I click superscript, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to make sure that this is also superscript. The same thing with the B, but with the B, maybe I don't want it to be superscript. Maybe I don't like how that looks. So in this font section here, if I click this, this little arrow, I go to the advanced tab in the pop-up window. I have this this option to set the position. So I'll set it as raised. And that just makes it move up a little bit. From there, you can reduce the font size. Nice and simple. If I do it in the table, I have to also do it to the footnote as well. There we go. So it's either it's raised like this or it's superscript. So make sure you choose. We ask that you draft your tables nice and simply. Try to, if you have to merge any cells or anything like that, try to do it at the very end just so that you don't corrupt the table, because that's one of the problems that we do meet often when we're editing is corrupted tables that are very, very complex and very difficult, therefore, to get XML out of. So that's something to be aware of. Then we have an example of a figure. So we've tried to keep the example nice and simple for you. So if you have any dimensions that you want to mention, you simply style that as the dimension 100 style. This will justify it, so you don't need to put it over there yourself. Just simply click. So if I show you on this insert and link figure, it jumps over itself. Then you need to insert and link your figure. So I'll show you how to do that very quickly. I don't have a figure to insert and link, but the principle is still the same. So you're going to highlight where you want it to go. You go to your insert tab, you go to pictures, and you want to click from this device. If you click this, it will open up your documents. So wherever you have your figures saved, you can click through. Once you have your figure file chosen, we're going to click this little drop-down arrow next to insert, and you click insert and link, and that will create a link to your figure file. And then you style that as figure image, and that will center justify it and add a little bit of space before and after as well. If you need to use a key, then we ask that you type key and you style that as key title, and that will make it bold and it will left justify it. And then any content that needs to go with the key, this needs to be in a table. So you can see here we've got a table laid out there. A little tip for you if you want to pop it into a table, you can draft it like so, 8, 1, 2, 3, B, 4, 5, 6. If you highlight this, you can go to the insert tab, table, insert table. You then just need to style that as key text. There we go. And then you'll go ahead and you will hide your border. Now, my colleagues did a great webinar on word use tips and tricks just before summer, so it's worth taking a look at that before you start drafting as well. But you can see it's very simple to draft out things like this. You'll then style this as key text. As I've already said, you can then modify the width of the table itself, but unfortunately the styling doesn't show up. Any notes that you have to the figure, they will be drafted as body text notes. styled as figure notes. They need to come after the key, but before the title. And any text that you have, so if you have any specific requirements that go with that figure, you need to style that as figure text. And again, that needs to come after any notes, certainly after the key, and before the title. And then the figure title, there we have that M dash again. And you can see the figure A1 along with a recommended figure title, and we style that as figure title. So that should all be fairly clear. If you have a subfigure, if you want to add a subfigure, how do we do that? So you'll make sure that your figures obviously are styled as figure image, and with the subtitle, you just need to style it as figure title, like so. So you see it center justifies it, it makes it bold. Okay, it's fairly simple, straightforward. So moving on to formulae, the first thing with formulae is we ask if it's simple. So if it's like A plus B equals C, or if it's anything else that's not so complex as you can see in example 2, anything like example 1. If you can type it in plain text with the keyboard, we ask that you prefer that, just because it helps keep the weight of the overall text down. So I will show you how to do this. So if we have 1 plus 2 equals 3, I then want to number my formula. So I'm going to use the round brackets, like so. So I've just typed this out with the keyboard. I'm then going to highlight this, and I'm going to style it as formula. So you can see the styling jumps the numbering over to the right-hand side. So sometimes we see people who have drafted their formula out in tables, and then they've hidden the borders. And while that does look very pretty, it does corrupt the document, and we do have to start the editing all over again, because it means that we can't process it, we can't activate it at all. So absolutely do not lay these out in tables, please. You can just rely on that styling. For your explanations, body text for where, and then anything else underneath it needs to go into a table. So as I showed you with the key content, you do the exact same thing here. So we don't want to see equal signs or anything like that. Just keep it simple. A is whatever, B is whatever, C is whatever. Keep it in a table, nice and simple. Hide your borders, and you'll style this as table body. So we've got a note to draft there. Just to remind you, for the simple formulae, you can just type it in with the keyboard and have it as plain text, as we can see here. But sometimes we know you have a lot of complex formulae, which again is completely simple, completely fine. So what we would recommend is that you download MathType. It is a paid software, so obviously it's not obligatory, but we do recommend it if you have a lot of formulae across a lot of documents. It's a worthwhile investment. We do use it here in CCMC. If you don't have access to it, you can use the built-in equation builder tool, which is found in the insert tab. So you need some body text right there. You go to your insert tab, and over here where you have symbols, you also have equation. You click that, it pops an equation in there for you. So just to show you in the print view, pops your equation in. Across the top, you have all of these symbols at your disposal. It's very simple to use, very intuitive. You just go ahead and click. I don't know what I'm clicking here, but then you just type into it. Very simple. And the same thing with the numbering if you want to number it for highlight and style that as formula. And it does the same thing. So it's fairly straightforward and fairly simple. The main thing to take away is not to use tables to lay this out. Okay, so we head back into our draft view. So you can just see an overview of the styling. So now we have the Annex ZA. So if you have a harmonized standards, I'm not going to talk about how to fill this out today because this is outside the scope of the webinar, but just from a styling perspective, again, we have the soft returns at the end of the title, and this title is the Annex Z. Now for Senelec, it's a little bit different. We need to modify this ever so slightly. But so we'll focus on Sen first because it's a little more straightforward. If you style this as Annex Z, it will be Annex ZA. And then each of these elements here are body text. The title of the table follows the exact same styling as a regular table. So title, header, and then table body. And then everything else, this you will need to delete because this is the note for the drafter. And then the two warnings at the end, these are styled as notice, and this just allows you to highlight it in the XML. For Senelec, it is Annex ZZ. So if you just have one Annex ZZ, you style it as Annex Z. and then you need to right click and you need to set the numbering value and you need to pop a Z in there. You click OK and it will style it as ZZ. If you have a ZZA and a ZZB, in the Senelect template, you'll have the Annex ZZ styling. So you just need to use that one and it will set it as Annex ZZA and ZZB. The exact same principle applies. Body text, the table styling is the same. And the same thing with those notices. And then finally, we have the bibliography. So the bibliography is very, very straightforward. It's a separate title on its own. So we head back to our draft view. We can see the styling is bibliotitle, and then each entry is biblioentry. The numbering is not obligatory. This is manually inserted. You need to make sure that it is the square brackets with the number in between and then a tab. You do also have the option if you want to have little titles in there too. You have the option to use biblio description. So if you want to organize your bibliography in any special way, so for example, books, European standards, EN ISO standards, that kind of thing, you can do that with the biblio description. So we just type in, maybe books, books, and then we highlight it, biblio description. From there, you can make it bold, you can make it more title. So that is largely the simple template. It is very simple, very intuitive to use. You shouldn't have too many problems with it. And for those of you who are a little concerned about the styling that I've gone through, within the webinar presentation slides, I've made a note of all of the styling for you. So you can just refer back to that. And it's worth noting we are working on a quick start guide as well, which will contain everything in this webinar as well. So that is something to keep a lookout for. So we'll go through a very quick recap on the internal regulations part 3 now. So for the scope, as I mentioned, it is an obligatory element, only containing statements of fact, no requirements, recommendations, or permissions, and it shall always be the first clause in the main body of the text. So it's always clause 1. Clause 2 is the normative references clause. As I've said, it's obligatory even if it's empty. The dated versus undated references, we ask that you date if there's a specific element referred to in the text. So for example, a table, a figure, or a clause. Undated for everything else, but if you have a harmonized standard, please take it case by case. If you're not sure if all of your standards need to be dated or undated, just contact the technical sectoral PM for some guidance and they should be able to help you. We also ask that you use only EN, ISO, or IEC references, preferably already published. But if you need to use an inquiry reference, we do allow that. Just make sure it is publicly available. If you have a non-EN, ISO, or IEC standard, you need to have a TC decision, which is obligatory in CEN. And absolutely no normative references to directives or legislation. This will block your text. We will remove them, and we will block them until we have your agreement as well. And just note the difference between amendments as well. If you're citing an amendment, plus A1 is a consolidated amendment, but the /A1 is a standalone amendment. So just be wary of those two. Clause 3 is always the terms and definitions clause. It's obligatory even if it is empty. Terms definitions shall be seamlessly replace the term in the text. They have to be simply drafted as well. No requirements in the definitions. Generally, if we see these, we do remove them. For the abbreviations clause, if you'd like to have that, you can split clause 3 into clause 3.1 and 3.2 to contain the abbreviations. Alternatively, you can have that as clause 4. There's no official introductory wording for abbreviations, but it's worth laying them out in a table to keep things neat. For tables, please make sure that they are simply drafted, that you have a clearly defined header. So I showed you in the template, you can make it bold. If your table breaks across multiple pages, please repeat the header rows. You don't need to split the table and give each one a title. You can just repeat your header rows, and that's clear enough. As I've said, keep your notes and footnotes in separate cells. Don't use any vertical text, as XML doesn't really like it very much. And no white text on a black background because XML doesn't support it at all. So if you use that, nobody will be able to see it if they use the XML version. And we ask that there's no funky colored cells. You can use gray shading, which is fine, but don't do a rainbow table or anything like that. For figures, keep them language neutral, and where explanations are needed, use a key. Figures have to have a number designation, but a title is strongly recommended but optional. Figure files, they're obligatory for SEN and not for Senelec. Separate files shall be provided at the time of submission. And although they are optional for Senelec, we do strongly recommend that you provide them to us, just because while we can create the figures ourselves, they're very, very poor quality. So if you want to have a nice high quality standard, absolutely pass those figure files on to us. There are different requirements between TIFF and EPS, but we've covered this in historic webinars from 2020, so you can go ahead and take a look at those for more detail. For Formulae, as I've said, math type is strongly advised, but if you don't have access to math type or it's not really worth an investment, you can use the keyboard for simple Formulae, or else use the built-in equation tool in Word. And just to note, when you are using that equation tool in Word, the editors do convert these into math type, and this can create some potential errors with specific symbols. So try to keep your formulae as simple as possible for that reason. But also when we send you the text back, just take a look at those formulae just to make sure that everything's correct before it's ratified. So a little note on hanging paragraphs. These are paragraphs which cannot be referred to directly in the text, and they are removed by editors using either general or introduction, or we'll take a quick scan of the text if those two have already been used, and we'll propose a title. For example, this example has been taken directly from the Internal Regulations Part 3. So you can see on the left-hand side, there's that paragraph that we can't really refer to directly under Clause 5, and it's been removed just with a general heading. And we'll always let you know if we do this as well. But it's worth noting that Clause 3 and any reagents or apparatus clauses do not count for this. So that is not considered a hanging paragraph. For verbal forms for expression of provisions, you strictly follow the tables found in the Internal Regulations Part 3 in Clause 7. But one of some of the common errors that we find is must to be used in place of requirements, which is not permitted, and may is not a possibility. So try and stick to what you see in those tables, please. And then a note on the notes. No requirements, recommendations, or permissions, except for in Clause 3 where they are permitted. And you have to number them if there's more than one. But again, in Clause 3, even if there's only one, then you have to number them still. So some useful info and links to finish off. So we're actually currently in the process of updating the SEN and Senelec BOSS drafting guidance. That is coming very, very soon. Certainly by the new year, everything will be in place. That will cover just the drafting guidance, how to submit your text to us, that kind of thing. So keep an eye out for that. If you are struggling with the templates and you don't have direct access to an editor, you can always contact our mail production colleagues at the email address shown on screen. We also have plenty of historic webinars that cover both SEN and Senelec, that cover the Internal Regulations Part 3, in-depth drafting guidance on each of the elements that I've covered today, and of course the Internal Regulations Part 3 as well. And it's worth noting, finally, that editors can be present at your drafting meeting. So if you are having any kind of trouble and you want some live help, do let us know. We can be there in person via Zoom or Teams, or we can be online. Please let us know at any point during the drafting procedure if this is something that you're interested in, and we can set something up. TCs don't need to be present if it is a working group meeting. We can talk straight to the drafters themselves, and we can offer guidance on a specific text, or we can offer you some general drafting guidance. We can tailor a presentation directly for you. So we're going to take a look at some of the questions now. So we'll mute, and then we will be back shortly with some answers.
Thank you very much, Amy, for this extensive overview. A few questions came in already, but our colleagues in the background have been replying them. I think there's one interesting question to kick off the drafting itself. Is someone's asking how to open the navigation menu that you showed us during the demo. The navigation menu on the left side?
Yeah, the navigation menu. It's very simple. So if I close it down, you can see my screen. Let's head back to our print view. There we go. So you've got two options. Either you can use a keyboard shortcut, you can do Control and F, which will open it up there. If you're not so confident with that, you can go into the View tab. And here you have Navigation Pane in Show. So if I click this, it appears, and I can click again to hide it. As I said, it's worth having it open because this does give you a comprehensive overview of everything, all of your headings in there, including, I forgot to mention, any table headings as well. So you can clearly see where the tables are. You can also reduce and increase the menus as well. So hopefully that is clear now.
Okay, thank you. Another question in relation to menus and opening is what someone's asking for, how to quickly go to the draft view.
Yeah, the draft view. So again, you've got two options. We're already in our view tab, so you can either click this button right here, draft, and that will take you there. And then right down in the right-hand corner, we've got print layout, so you can click that there, or you've got it there too. The keyboard shortcut for it is Control and then Alt and then N for Nora. So that's how you do that.